Ask the Doctor. I'm Russ Jaffe. This is an interactive webinar. I'm a physician, internist, biochemist, clinical nutritionist. I maintain a fellow status in the American Society for Clinical Pathology, the American College of Nutrition, the American College of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, the Federation of Clinical Immunology Societies. I'm a fellow of the American Medical Laboratory Immunologists, and I'm an overseas fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. I'm a fellow of the Health Studies Collegium Foundation that brings this webinar to you. And for disclosure, I am founder and chairman of PERQUE Integrative Health, ELISA Act Biotechnologies, and RMJ-HRX Drug Development. So we have some questions today, and I'm going to do my best to answer them and to engage the conversation about how to improve outcomes. First question is, how do we lower calcium? When PTH, parathormone levels are normal, when vitamin D is within normal limits, and the person is not on calcium supplements. Now, sometimes a good question deserves another question. And so I have, as a laboratorian and a clinician, a few questions to ask. One, is it the total calcium or is it the ionized calcium that's elevated? If it's the total calcium, then look at the total protein. It too may be elevated. Globulins or albumin may be increased, and so the total calcium may be increased. But please remember that the active calcium is the free or ionized calcium. And so you want to be able to measure ionized calcium in order to distinguish whether you have an artifactual elevation, too high a calcium because of the protein that binds the calcium, or do you have an ionized increased active fraction of calcium? And since in biology it's always about ratios and never about absolutes, you want to know what balances out calcium, and that's magnesium. And as a researcher, you might want ionized magnesium, but as a clinician, serum magnesium is available. And as Ron Aline has taught, the goal range with regard to serum magnesium is the upper half of the usual range. And that's where people are who have enough magnesium in their cells. So the serum, as we know, or the plasma is conserved, and the cells may be hungry, say, for magnesium. And yet you would have a, quote, within normal limits of lab ranges value for the serum magnesium. And this condition is called chronic latent magnesium deficiency, CLMD, chronic latent magnesium deficiency. And if the serum magnesium is in the lower half of the usual range, the person is likely to be deficient in magnesium and have a relative excess of calcium. So the second question is, what's the serum magnesium? The third question is, what's the urine pH after 6 hours of rest? If the individual has a pH between 6.5 and 7.5 on the first urine that comes out after 6 hours of rest, so that the bladder fluid has equilibrated with the bladder and kidney cells, so that the urine has equilibrated with the bladder and kidney cells, and now we have a non-invasive measure of cellular metabolic acidosis. The pH goal is 6.5 to 7.5. That indicates enough minerals to balance out metabolic acids. But if the pH is less than 6.5, this suggests excess acids and deficiency of minerals, particularly magnesium and also potassium. Now, what is the vitamin D level? The goal range is 50 to 80 nanograms per ml. But since the nation is deficient in vitamin D, most lab ranges reflect the deficiency of vitamin D. And so when we say someone is within the usual lab range, but most people are already deficient, then those values really don't have much meaning. So we want to know the ionized calcium to know the truly active calcium. We want to know how that balances out magnesium. We want to know the first urine pH after rest, and we want to know the vitamin D level. And then we'll be able to ask the question of, first, is the calcium really elevated? Second, Is the vitamin D really within normal limits? And most importantly, is the calcium to magnesium ratio functioning in a healthful way or in a less than healthful way? Now we have another question, completely different question, but a very interesting one also. This is a person who has progression of stones. They have gallstones and kidney stones and nodules on the fingers, which actually are related to stones, and calcification of hearing bones. This leads to bilateral significant loss of hearing over 2 years. And what is the dynamic here? That's the question. What's the mechanism? What's going on here? And what can reverse this stone formation, especially the kidney stones? Well, with regard to kidney stones, since that seems to be the primary concern, the answer is hydration. If you have enough water as your beverage of choice to keep the urine dilute, only in a concentrated urine can a stone form. In dilute urine, a stone cannot form. And if you start with a well-hydrated dilute urine so that you prevent new stone formation, and you then eat a modified vegetarian diet, an immunotolerant diet, there are not immune reactions burdening the system and adding to the matrix in the urine. When water becomes the beverage of choice so that you are well hydrated, when you have a diet that doesn't contribute extra acid, especially from immune reactions, then you can actually dissolve kidney stones. You can actually slowly dissolve previously formed kidney stones simply by taking in the amount of ascorbates recommended with the C cleanse. So in addition to water as beverage of choice, you want to know the amount of ascorbate vitamin C, and that's based on the C cleanse. Then you want to eat a diet that doesn't burden the immune system and allows for repair, because part of repair even includes dissolving kidney stones. Now let's get back to gallstones. Gallstones happen when the bile is too concentrated, when the body is not well hydrated, when you have unhealthy fats being concentrated to get rid of them through the bile into the intestines, where hopefully they'll bind to fiber and get out of the body, but otherwise they could get reabsorbed and eventually concentrate, build up, and create sludge in the gallbladder. So gallstones also relate to hydration and the kinds of quality of fat. We can improve the hydration, we can improve the dietary fat balance and the quality of fat in, and yes, you can even slowly dissolve gallstones. Now, nodules on the fingers indicate a repair deficit in the joints. That is almost always an autoimmune or self-attacking condition, an arthritis-like condition. And if you want to stimulate repair, the LRA by ELISA Act plan, along with the PERQUE supplements and the attitudinal and activity program, combining what you eat and drink with what you think and do to evoke healing responses and remove obstacles to recovery. There's an obstacle to recovery when nodules form on fingers and in joints. Joints are meant to be flexible and repair. When the joints become swollen and uncomfortable, when they don't repair, and then nodules can form, and with it what we call inflammation or discomfort, and we suggest that's really cumulative repair deficit. So hydration helps on both the kidney stone and the gallstone side, and especially when you combine that with the amount of ascorbates that will help dissolve kidney stones and improve the quality of fats. And then, of course, we recommend that you have liver support through PERQUE LivaGuard Forte and PERQUE Detoxin Guard so that you can make more soluble bile. And along with good water hydration, you have good fat hydration so you can slowly dissolve gallstones. You can stimulate repair in the nodules of the fingers, and even hearing bones that have become calcified because of local acidosis and too much relative calcium and too little magnesium. That calcification can dissolve in the same way that the kidney stone calcifications can dissolve. And yes, it comes on slowly and it dissolves slowly, but you can actually restore hearing in many people who have had recent hearing loss due to calcification of the hearing bones by following this kind of program. Now we have a different question. Can vitamin K block calcium being laid down into soft tissues and inflammatory areas of the body? And let me see if I understand the question. I think the question is, if you have a relative excess of calcium and you're beginning to build up hardened plaques in blood vessels or in bursas and you have bursitis, if you have, quote, calcium being laid down in soft tissues where there's a repair deficit or what we call inflammation, will vitamin K help? Well, we need two different forms of vitamin K. We need K1 and K2 to build helpful calcium binding proteins to rebuild bone and liver functions, because healthier calcium transport while avoiding local acidosis prevents calcium from being laid down while promoting repair, so inflammation goes away. And when you do that consistently, the vitamin K builds calcium binding proteins, and these calcium binding proteins remove calcium from where it shouldn't be and help it to go to the bones where it should be. So we recommend PERQUE Potent C Guard based on the C Cleanse, PERQUE Repair Guard for polyphenolics, or PERQUE Way Guard Repair, a meal that includes the polyphenolics, along with PERQUE Life Guard tabsules, so that you get K1 and K2. We would add PERQUE Bone Guard or PERQUE Hair, Skin, and Nails Guard that contain both K1 and K2, so that you can get the benefit of calcium binding, remove it from where it's not wanted, and deposit it where it's needed. A completely different question. How do cooked or uncooked foods respond differently in food sensitivity testing, and what is used for the LRA? Well, the LRA is very special. We find that the LRA by ELISA Act requires a higher purity of antigens, a higher purity of what we're testing the cells against, and so we purify our own antigens. That is, we extract from the source material the soluble antigens, which are the same in raw and cooked foods. The difference is that the antigens more easily come out of partially cooked foods, but we have to look at what cooking does to foods. If you fully cook the food, you denature the protein. If you denature the protein, you lose its antigenic uniqueness. So we don't use cooked foods. We extract the materials so that we get the soluble pure antigens, the ones you would find in both raw and or cooked foods. And that's what we use in the LRA by ELISA Act. Now, if you do cook a food, you could end up with all sorts of randomly composed glunk, and that might be foreign sometimes to some antibodies, but you wouldn't confuse that with a high specificity lymphocyte response assay such as LRA by ELISA Act, where you're actually looking at the reactive antigens in an ex vivo, just as they occur in the body procedure, rather than an old-fashioned serology antibody test that gives you part of the B cell, only part of the B cell reactions, and none of the T cell reactions. In contrast, LRA by ELISA Act distinguishes the harmful B cell reactions from the helpful ones, includes the immune complexes and also the T cell reactions, so you get three different pathways concurrently measured, just as they occur in the body, without the confusion of serology or antibody like IgG kinds of tests. So LRA purifies the soluble antigens, and other labs may try to use cooked foods, but denatured means loss of antigen, and partially cooked is like a half-cooked goose. If you're going to cook a goose, really cook it. A half-cooked goose doesn't really get you what you need. Now here's an interesting question. Why do we think there's such a high rate of Lyme's disease today, even in people who don't seem to have been bitten by a tick? Well, that's a little bit complicated because ticks are often very small and you may not know you've been bitten. But more importantly, let's look as colleagues at Lyme's syndrome or Lyme disease. First observed in Lyme, Connecticut, associated initially with rickettsia, but now with Ehrlichia and Babesia and all sorts of organisms that have, by their naming, you wouldn't want to have these inside your body. And not only do these organisms get in the body, but they get inside the cell. And you would think once they get in the cell, oh boy, that's just terrible. The more you fight with the infectious agent, in my experience, the less effective the outcomes. And on the other hand, if you rethink health so that you see the organisms associated with Lyme disease as markers of host hospitality, they're markers of a high redox state, they're markers of acidosis in the cells, they're markers of repair deficit, they're markers of deficiency. So let's see, how would we approach, with this rethink health approach, how would we approach Lyme? Well, we would say a C cleanse so that you reset the redox to a healthy low level and take in the full amount of ascorbate you need to protect from oxidative damage. Then we would suggest first morning urine pH so that metabolic acidosis doesn't make you hospitable to these organisms. Yes, indeed, these organisms thrive when there's too much acid in the cell, shutting down the cell battery, and because of a lack of magnesium and potassium that restores the proton gradient. So we want to restore the proton gradient. We want to chaperone magnesium into the cell to correct the acidosis in the cell. We want to have as much ascorbate as that individual needs to protect them from oxidative damage. We want to stimulate their repair rather than leave them in an inflammatory repair deficient state. We want them to be able to detoxify, which means measuring homocysteine to make sure that sulfur metabolism is able to get the bad stuff out, the toxic metals and some of the other toxicants that can contribute to chronic unwellness. And most importantly, there are a lot more hospitable people today than there used to be. So my bottom line is that we see and diagnose more Lyme's disease today than before because there are more hospitable people who are chronically unwell. And it's not about the Rickettsia, Babesia, Ehrlichia, and those little funny bugs that get inside the cell. It's why we're hospitable to those when we're exposed. So I want people to reverse their hospitality to chronic ill health and engage their capacity to remove obstacles to recovery and evoke human healing responses. Here we have another case, a 50-year-old woman with a long history of severe reflux that was somehow associated with a loss of smell and taste and a 7-year history of severe neuropathy. She can no longer run, hike, or climb, and hopefully she could before, because we'd like her to do that. The neuropathy started after treatment for yeast with nystatin, and she has normal breath tests. Previous food allergy testing at Cyrex showed no significant allergies. Heavy metal testing showed no significant elevations, and Lyme studies were normal. What a perplexing situation. Well, here's how I put it together. This woman had reflux, what's often called GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and probably treated with either H2 blockers or proton pump inhibitors, and that in turn reduced the amount of B complex and B12 that she was able to absorb and reduced the amount of magnesium that her body was taking in, and that produced both the loss of smell and taste and the neuropathy. We know that neuropathy is related to B complex and B12 deficiency. We know that neuropathy is related to magnesium deficiency. We know that smell and taste are also associated with the same problems plus loss of zinc. So here I suggest that this person had a loss of stomach acid, possibly by treatment for their reflux. As a consequence of the reduced stomach acid, digestion was impaired, smell and taste were lost because of magnesium and zinc deficiency, and neuropathy occurred because of B complex deficiency, B12 deficiency, and magnesium deficiency. With regard to the neuropathy being associated with yeast treatment with nystatin, my approach to candida or yeast problems is to have a healthier transit time and be eating foods that you can digest, assimilate and eliminate, without immune burden. Then you have a healthy 12 to 18-hour transit time. You don't have partially digested food in the colon, and yeast can't overgrow, and there's no need for anti-yeast therapy. My experience is that if you do an antifungal diagnostic and then a therapeutic like nystatin, that you end up selecting the most resistant yeast and you haven't addressed the cause. We prefer to address the cause, not just the symptomatic consequences, and get better outcome results. The normal breath test means she doesn't have overgrowth in the small intestine of bacteria. And the food allergy test at Cyrex means that she doesn't have antibodies. That's okay. But we don't know about T cells, and we haven't done a functional immunology procedure. We did a serology antibody static test. And while heavy metals were not remarkable, I'm assuming this was an unprovoked specimen, and I suggest a D-penicillamine provocation to test for both essential nutritional as well as toxic minerals to confirm that inside the cells you don't have some toxic metals hiding. And the Lyme studies did not show any of the organisms associated with Lyme as the problem here, which I agree with, but that doesn't tell me what to do. It tells me one of the things that's probably not involved. So I believe this person can reverse their neuropathy and restore their smell and taste by correcting their metabolic acidosis, enhancing magnesium, zinc, and potassium, and eating a diet that they can digest, assimilate, and eliminate without immune burden. Here's a question about understanding LRA tests that measure all delayed pathways, but particularly, can we explain the lymphocyte role in type 2 delayed hypersensitivity? Well, type 2 means antibodies, and antibodies with regard to white cells mean lymphocytes of the B cell class, those bursa-related lymphocytes that become plasma cell factories to produce antibodies. They are the type 2 reactors. So lymphocytes that produce antibodies, long-lived white cells called lymphocytes that produce antibodies, are responsible for the type 2 delayed hypersensitivity reactions. However, antibodies come in helpful and harmful kinds. And if you have a helpful neutralizing antibody, that's good. And if you have a harmful complement-fixing, symptom-provoking antibody, that's bad. A true lymphocyte response assay, a functional ex vivo lymphocyte response assay, can distinguish helpful from harmful type 2 antibodies. But a serology test, an antibody test, an IgG test of one sort or another cannot tell you whether this is a helpful or a harmful antibody. And so its presence doesn't mean problems. It could be protective. And its absence isn't reassuring because you've missed the T cell side, which is type 4. So you need a lymphocyte response assay, not an old serology assay, if you want to understand type 2 antibody-related reactions in hypersensitivity. Here's a question about, can we explain why one would ever develop an antibody to foods? Well, this is a kind of subtle and important point. Your body knows you and not you. Your body knows self and not self. Your body knows me and not me. So anything that's foreign, whether it be a food digestive remnant or an infectious agent, anything that's foreign is not you, and your immune system has first responsibility to neutralize that, or second responsibility to eliminate it. So the first choice is the innate immune system, take it in, recycle it, break it down, and use the building blocks. But if there's too much foreign invasion, or if the first line immune system has low energy and is sludged up itself somehow, then you have a backup adaptive system. And that's what is responsible for type 2, 3, and 4 reactions, 3 different pathways. That's how important it is in the body. So we do develop antibodies to anything that's foreign that gets in our body. When our digestion is healthy, we break things down to their building blocks. There's no digestive remnants. There's no immune reactive stuff left in the intestines. On the other hand, when we have repair deficit and inflammation, when we don't have enough fiber to bind the toxins, when we only partially break foods down and then don't trap them with mucins and secretory IgA and other protective elective mechanisms, Then foreign digestive remnants from foods can get in the body, and the body sees something as foreign or not, and not self, foreign meaning not self, and will respond, whether it's an infectious agent or a food remnant, it doesn't matter. They're both foreign, and the immune system will respond against them. So glad you're asking the question about how could you or why would you develop an antibody to foods? But since 3/4 of the antibodies are helpful, 3/4 of the antibodies are neutralizing, 3/4 of the antibodies protect you in case you get exposed to a little bit of that food, it's actually a smart thing for a healthy body to be able to develop neutralizing antibodies to foods. And here we have our last question for this sequence. The immune system is responsible for inflammation, which is really repair deficit. And xenotoxins, environmental toxins that can be haptens, they're small molecules that can distort the body's shape and render it foreign to itself, they all have to be taken into account. So we want high sensitivity tests to detect delayed allergies, especially to small molecules like heavy or toxic metals, and here the HS-LRA by ELISA Act, lymphocyte response assay by ELISA Act method, and ex vivo measurement, measuring what happens in the body just as it happens in the body, but under controlled laboratory conditions, where we have less than 3% variance on split samples, really reproducible. And then we provide a comprehensive detoxification and immune repair system. Joy in Living the Alkaline Way is a monograph, is a booklet. It's about what we eat and drink and think and do, and how to combine these in ways that evoke healing responses rather than have inhibited healing responses. We have a personalized antioxidant repair enhancement program with individualized nutrient intake and lifestyle changes. On behalf of the Health Studies Collegium webinar, Ask the Doctor, it's been my privilege to present this to you. May you be well and happy, and may we see each other soon in health.